Baseball Books and Banter. Again, not sponsored by anyone, although I hope they listen to this podcast and Dairy Queen feels the need to sponsor me with copious amounts of Oreo Blizzards. That would be lovely. That will make sense once you listen to the podcast. But for now, it is March, and something just came up on my screen that threw me off completely, so sorry for that pause. We are almost to the end of March, which is kind of bananas because I feel like it just started. We're in the midst of March Madness right now, which my bracket has officially been busted. I have two brackets, one with my brother's friends and then one with my work friends. And yeah, I think I'm sixth out of I'm tied for last place. I don't know about the Brandon bracket, but that one I put money on, and I'm very upset about that. But if it could all be different if UConn wins the whole thing, because that's who I picked, because I'm apparently a homer. What can I say? So March Madness is happening, which is great for me because I can watch it during work while I'm tip typing my tech writing. Also this week, baseball started with 2 games in Japan, so I got to watch some day baseball, which kind of reminded me of being in the pandemic because I would watch the Korean League and the Japanese League, which very different from American stadium experiences. Also, spring training's wrapping up. My dad and my brother were there at the beginning of the week and got to see some really good baseball. I'm excited. The Red Sox are finishing their Florida this week, and they're going to Monterey, Florida to play Monterey, Mexico to do 2 games there at a stadium against a Mexican team. And then they start next Thursday, the 27th, in Texas, and I'm kind of excited. I'm ready for baseball season. It's been a long weekend. Today, so I guess before we get into the podcast, we'll do some things I'm obsessed with. I don't have a ton of things I'm obsessed with this week, but one thing I am obsessed with is on the news. A coffee shop in New Hampshire, Exeter, New Hampshire, called Flamingo Coffee, got a review from a very upset misogynist who called them disgustingly pro-women. Well, like any good entrepreneur, they took that slogan and now have made shirts, and so their slogan is now disgustingly pro-women, which I think is fantastic and really apropos for this episode because we do talk a lot about women's history, and as I say in the podcast, I support women's rights and I support women's wrongs. So hopefully they continue to succeed, and that person, presumably a man who wrote that, lives the life he deserves. Other things I'm obsessed with, not too much. Basketball's been on. I started watching the new Watson show on CBS. It's all right. I love Morris Chestnut. He's very dreamy, but like the show is kind of like meh. Let's see, what else, Fern, can we tell people? Yeah, it's been kind of a quiet time. I got over the flu from our last podcast, so it's kind of nice to be able to talk and not cough. And today I'm wearing my Rainbow Bright earrings because I just felt like I needed a little Rainbow Bright in my life. The other thing kind of cool that's happening is my college hockey team is in the frozen, whatever they call it, the bracket for the hockey. I was going to go at 3 o'clock today, but I read online they are sold out. So I'm going to just keep an eye on the score, and maybe if they go to the Frozen Four, I will take a little trip to see them play. I didn't go a lot in college. My friends were big hockey people. I did more of the football, which even then I didn't do a ton of it. Basketball was my jam. I had a crush on some basketball players, so I went there a lot. I have a thing for basketball players. And other than that, that's kind of all that's happened this week. I'm just getting over being sick, getting stuff together. We ended up canceling the event at the Norwell Library, but I'll talk more about events after. I do want to get into this discussion with Elizabeth DeWolfe, Beth DeWolfe. She is a professor of history and gender, women's sexuality studies at the University of New England in Maine. And we became friends on Facebook first. We have a mutual friend, Edith, who we talk about in the podcast. And so I've just loved following her stuff. And her new book, I raved about it to her face, probably a little embarrassing because it's really good, guys. Like, it's one of those stories that you wish you would have learned about when you were in high school. Like, these stories of strong women who kind of changed the course of history, in that the book is called Alias Agnes, and the book is the story of a woman who sued her former lover, who happened to be a member of Congress, for breach of promise. He kept her for 9 years and then said he was going to marry her, then didn't, made her give up children for adoption. She had miscarriages, and she sued for breach of promise to say he essentially took away her youth. And I think that's ballsy. And I'm almost very at the end of the book, which is really good. I'm in the court case right now. And I mean, I don't know why people don't put this on TV, because this is something I would watch. So Elizabeth was great. I took a lot of hard lefts because I wanted to talk about her cat Floyd. I wanted to know more about her life as a professor. Um, I probably could have talked to her about 100 more things, but super cool. Can't wait for you to listen to her and let me know what you think. Welcome to Baseball Books and Banter with today's guest, Professor Extraordinaire, well, of History and Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of New England, Beth DeWolfe. Welcome.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
We were talking a little bit beforehand. We have a lot of mutual friends in common. And so it kind of really, we became Facebook friends first. And then um, I'm reading the book that's coming out at the end of the April, and it is so good. So I'm so excited. But why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
All right. Thank you very much. I am Professor Elizabeth DeWolfe. I've been at the University of New England in Maine for almost 30 years.
Wow.
And
I'm like,
my,
wow, that's a
yeah,
long
I know. Well,
time.
I started as a child, of
Yes,
course.
of course, of course.
My career has focused on telling the stories of women, both through classes in women's history. I teach classes in archival research methods, how to pull out those
Mm.
stories. And just personally, what engages me in history is something that I never saw in my high school US history class. One, the front of my teacher. I can only picture her from the back because she spent most of the class writing long lists of names and dates
Oh, yeah.
on the board. And most of these were about, great white men, the wars they fought and the laws they passed.
Mhm.
And even in my, 14-year-old brain, I was thinking, didn't people like me
Right,
ever do anything in history?
right.
Regular people?
Sure.
So, I took initially a very different path into the sciences. And if you had told me at 14 I would have become a history professor, I
Wow.
would have laughed. But I just love it.
Yeah.
So in my research, I suppose specialize in the stories of women that history has overlooked, and really quite ordinary women to whom something extraordinary has happened. And that has been my honor and my passion and my pleasure for my career.
And it's great because, like you said, a lot of history is written by old white men. And yeah, and that's one of the things I love about reading not just historical nonfiction like history books, but about historical fiction as well. Because a lot of writers, and this is why I don't write it, because I don't think I could get into the research as much. But like Edith Maxwell, friend, and her midwife mysteries, like I didn't know some of that stuff going on, and I love the Victorian, the Gilded Age, the Victorian Age, the Edwardian Age, all those ages where there's you logically you're like there's women there. So what were they doing while their men were fighting in France, or their men were, in parliament? Like they had to be doing something. And I think, if well, not to get political, but now more than ever we need those stories, because it feels like they're rolling them away from it again, and we're going back to how it was before, where you, like you said, it's just a list of names, here's the dates, here's all the wars. And that really leads into your upcoming book, Alias Agnes. It's like a tongue twister to
It
say
is.
Alias Agnes, um, which is kind of the precursor to the Me Too, like a long historical precursor to Me Too. And kind of seeing it basically tells the story of this young woman who, Madeline Pollard, who um, entered into an affair with a congressperson. Silly, who does that? Like, that doesn't happen. And this was in the late 1800s. And after he did his thing and eventually left, she sued him for breach of promise, which, thinking back, like, yeah, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah,
He did that,
exactly.
you know? And it's like, oh, yeah, but then you think, oh, in the 1800s, men were on the juries, men were the lawyers, men were the thing, women couldn't even go to the courtrooms, all this stuff. And you're like, wow, that takes balls, like,
Yeah,
for lack of a better word.
yeah.
Um, and it also dovetails with the story of another young woman from Boston or from the New England area, who became almost a private detective spy for the opposing side. And it's kind of the dichotomy of these two women. Who do you believe? Who do you not believe? I always say I am a feminist and I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. And I feel like that's a little bit part of it, that the detective thinks one way about this woman and she's gonna go for it, and then you don't know, and it's twisty and it's true. And where did that kind of come from for you? Is it just you? I remember you wrote about it in the foreword to the book, or the prologue, but kind of lead us through that, how that research came about, and you're like, oh, this would be good.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love that. Twisty, but it's true.
Yeah,
I should have put that on the cover.
next time. That's paperback version.
Paperback version. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I stumbled onto this story. All of my projects I pretty much stumble on, usually in rare bookstores or book shows. And I was at a book show. My husband's a rare book dealer, so I went along with him, help out. But it was almost the end of the show. The crowd had thinned. We're all a little bored, just want to go home. So I start poking through another dealer's stock, and I find what's called a salesman sample of a book that was going to be published if enough people signed up for it in
Okay.
1894 about this case, Breckenridge versus Pollard. So a salesman sample, it's kind of like a preview on Amazon. You don't get all the pages.
Yeah.
You just get a few. So I
Okay.
saw it and I was thinking, huh, I never heard about this scandal.
Yeah.
So, I didn't buy it, but I went home that night and it was eating at me. So I start doing a little work and I find out no one's written on this. And then I thought, well, I should see if that book was ever published.
Yeah.
And it was. And so I get a copy, and as I read it, I'm thinking, wait a second, there's a story here. And
Mhm.
all that had been written in our, 20th and 21st century is a couple of short articles, a chapter in a book that really focused on, no surprise,
Yep.
how this trial ruined the congressman's future political career. Not a question. No one bothered to ask, well, what happened to Madeline Pollard after
Yeah.
she became the most well known woman of 1894? And what was her life before
Right.
she met Breckenridge? So that's how I entered this project. But as I did the research on Madeline, I thought I was writing a book about Madeline Pollard. And then, and with women, you often have to start with the papers of men.
Yep.
Reading through Breckenridge's papers, I got hints of some scheme
Hmm.
going on with his attorney making these secretive and hurried trips to Boston
Mm.
to interview an unprofessional.
Mm.
And kind of long story short, the hints started to coalesce with other things I had read, kind of clicked into place that what the unprofessional he had hired was a stenographer who was going to serve as an undercover detective, what in the 19th century they called a girl spy, to find and befriend Madeline Pollard, and in their heart to heart female talks, steal her secrets, turn them over to the congressman's legal team so they could use them against her in the trial.
So crazy.
It's nuts.
It's
I almost
crazy.
didn't believe it.
Yeah, because you and reading, you really bring that character to life too. One of my I went to my library yesterday to pick up a book, Amanda Flower's latest Emily Dickinson mystery.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, it's a good one, a good series. And I was telling one of the librarians that I was interviewing you today, and I mentioned the book, and she's like, "Oh, what's it about?" And I was like, "Oh, girl, it is like it. You know how they do the courtroom shows, like the Menendez brothers and stuff. This deserves its own show because Jane Agnes Parker is her alias, hence Alias Agnes. She really does kind of come onto the scene. She's very sure of herself. She knew she wanted to get out of the house. She wanted to do something professional. She becomes a stenographer. She opens a business with another woman, and through all these different connections, she becomes a spy. And I think she really takes to it too. Like there's a lot of, she's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then all of a sudden she's like a master spy. But one of the things I told the librarian that I loved most was how she signed her letters hastily Jane, because she was always
Yeah.
so busy. And I'm like, oh, that might be my new email sign off at work, like hastily Nicole, just because it's genius. But I really like that it does show that while we always people tend to treat women as a monolith and generalize us and put us all together into a box, there are two, people have different
Mm.
viewpoints, and while some of us are like, yeah, get that guy, there's another one who says, well, I'm being paid to not get that guy,
Yeah.
and I feel like there's probably a little intuition there. So I just, when you were researching both women, how did you find that? Like, did you find, well, because I know there's not a lot about Jane, because she's a little bit more a spy. You probably shouldn't know a lot about her. And then Madeline Pollard obviously was notorious at that time. So, like, how was the research between the two women?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And
God.
that's a really, I mean, that's a big dilemma,
Yeah.
for historians is whose account do I believe? So what we have from Madeline is what she says in court
Yep.
and what Jane reports she says in
In
the
private.
evening. So do we trust Jane in accurately reporting Madeline's words? I think so.
Right.
But Jane then puts a gloss on it,
Right.
usually quite snarky. Like, for example, Jane reports to the lawyers each evening what Madeline eats and how much she
Yeah.
eats. And so, if Madeline is on the stand talking about her infant babies that she left at orphanages and subsequently died, and then goes back to the House of Mercy, and Jane makes her little salad, and Madeline eats heartily, Jane will report to the lawyers, well,
It's not affecting her at all.
yeah, so she must be lying on the
Yeah.
state, because any mom would not
Yeah.
eat.
From
So,
from another non-mother, which is kind of,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly that. Um, so, so parsing that out was hard. So from Jane, I do have a few of her reports to the attorneys.
Okay.
Um, the 1894 book that she wrote, which had a decided agenda,
Sure.
and letters to her mother and her sister. And she didn't tell them what she was doing. She hinted around. Her mother
Sure.
eventually guesses. But you get a little more honesty
Hmm.
in those letters, especially when she criticizes the attorneys.
Yeah.
Um, I think what's so telling is that even though her book is written for an agenda with one of the attorneys, you start to see towards the end her doubt
Yeah.
as she starts to realize that even though they're on opposite sides of a lawsuit, they are both women in the 1890s who have considerable barriers against them of all sorts,
Hmm.
and they are each just trying to
Sure.
navigate to their slice of the American dream women's version. And both of them were rejecting the, stay at home, be married, have a bunch of kids, and sit in a parlor. You know,
Which sounds
Madeline
so
wanted to,
boring.
yeah,
So
Madeline
boring.
wanted, to
Yeah.
marry, but she wanted a very different married
Yeah.
life. And Jane had no interest in it. So you start to see these doubts. Will we ever get to the real? We can't. Those
Right.
everything is written with a point of view in mind. But
Right.
it was fascinating trying to see
Where they intersect
Jane,
almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, through these letters. It was just it was fun.
Yeah,
It
I
was
bet. Oh
downright
my
fun.
God.
I don't know another word for it. Yeah.
That's the one thing I love about history people is that, you find a nugget and then you're like, dig, dig, dig. Like now we call it,
Yeah.
falling down the wiki hole because you're like, okay, let me click that. Let me click that. And obviously everything on the internet's true. So you have to believe it. And it's fascinating how the kind of case that this book is based on. I mean, we're still seeing it. I mean, in sexual assault cases, the same things happen where it's like, well, but were you friends with a guy? Yeah, I was. And they're like, well, that shows. So I think as for as much as we've moved forward, there's still stuff to work at from the 1800s. But I do like the agency the two women have, and that they're real people, which I think is also important, that it's not a historical fiction. It's real life.
I
Like
know.
these were two real people.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I was looking at your website earlier about some of your other books. Again, real people almost forgotten to history.
Mhm.
And do you find yourself that's kind of what you're drawn to, is the people that are kind of not well, not the same stories you're hearing over and over again. These are people, the murder of Mary Bean, was that yeah,
Yeah.
where a mill worker
Yeah, just ordinary mill worker.
in
And
this
if
area is so prevalent. We have so many mills in New England, and it's like, yeah, that's probably a common story
mhm.
that nobody's ever told.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So all, Beringa Caswell, another woman with an alias.
Hmm.
um, yeah, her story we would not have known at all. The only manuscript in her hand is her signature on a payroll record.
Wow.
That's the only evidence that she lived,
Existed.
if
Oh,
not for this trial,
yeah.
for her death. And
Oh,
the same thing with the book, Shaking the Faith, about an anti-Shaker activist. People looked at this woman whose husband and 5 children remained at the Shaker. She had joined with him. Wasn't for her. She leaves, and she's denied custody of her children. And she fights for 50 years to get them
wow.
back and to change the laws that trapped her. And the buzz in the kind of academic community was, well, she was nuts. I
Oh,
mean, she was crazy. Why would you fight the Shakers for 50
yeah.
years? And it doesn't take,
It's your kids.
to be a mother to say she wanted her
Yeah,
children.
right. Like that's yeah, like that to me is like, yeah, she could be crazy, but they're her kids.
They're her kids. So there's another woman that, if not for a couple of court cases and, a mob,
Yeah.
we would not have known her. And so, yeah, I feel very, when I stumble onto these stories,
Yeah.
I feel bound to tell them. I
Yeah.
put photographs of whoever I'm writing about. They're up above my desk
Oh,
as a way to say these were real people,
yeah.
right? This is not just a way for me to, and I acknowledge that by doing this, I got tenure at a university.
Yeah.
I sell books. I mean, get huge
Fingers
royalties with
crossed.
academic books. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I recognize the benefits I glean from telling their stories.
Oh,
So I feel bound to tell them
yeah.
in as full a way as I can.
Yeah. Well, again, I
Um,
think that shows your history background in that you want it to be. There's smoke coming from across the street. Oh, they're in a fireplace. Okay, it's not a fire, guys. They're just doing an outdoor fire thing. All right, that was terrifying. But I think that shows the history is where you want to make it, um, like I said, give a voice. And I feel like a lot of history people, I mean, I'm big into military history because of my family being military, and I just like to learn about the voices of other people. Like I like reading my grandfather's submarine records because it gives a
mm,
voice to his crew members, and I can go, oh, that's what his life was like. I wish he was still around so I could ask him more questions.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm fascinated by that whole, um, giving power back to these people. They tried to claim their power in the courts. Some of
Mm,
them won, some of them took 50 years, some of them whatever. And I think this is a way to make it more human, and that people
yeah.
can again, they're real people. Like I feel like I have to keep harping on this. Like, guys, this is real life. Like this
Yeah.
wasn't some nebulous story on Downton Abbey. Like real people.
Yeah.
Um, And do you, so we're going to switch gear, like hard left, ready? Hard left. Because I love the book. At the library, I told the librarian and she Googled it real quick. And I think she's going to order it for the library.
Yeah,
So
thank
Abington,
you.
it'll be in the Abington Public Library, hopefully. If not, I will make them because that's my library. And I
Thank you.
think people would love this story. Um, with the full-time job as a professor, how do you find the research time, the writing time? Um, I don't want to say does your job get in the way, but like do you find a hard balance?
It is a challenge, and I jokingly say I'd get a lot more work done if there weren't so many students around the university. Um,
Sure.
but the students and teaching is why I'm there,
Yeah.
and certainly passing on to new generations the importance of knowing women's history
Mm.
is my meaning and message in life.
Yeah.
That said,
It would be nice. No.
uh, the reality is, I teach at the University of New England. We're a regional school. We're not a big fancy pants school. We're not an R1. We don't get, tons of research time. The university is supportive in many ways, but
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
So generally, the majority of my research trips, I took 2 month-long trips to Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
I made 5 trips to the Library of Congress. I did some work overseas as well. That has to happen in the summer.
Right.
There's simply not enough time in the academic year to do that. I did spend 3 sabbaticals. We're able to apply for sabbatical every 7th year,
Okay.
and yeah, there were 3 of them. So the first one did the majority of the research, and then at the Library of Congress, and then the subsequent ones were more trips to Washington, to other archives, trips to. There was at least one where I went to
Right.
Kentucky, and a couple in there that were London as well. So you make it work in the summer. It's when a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us do our research trips and our extended writing, sabbaticals, and then you just try to fit it in. And one thing I did early in my career, and it worked well for me, is I picked a day or
Mm-hmm.
a half day right on my calendar. I block it off. Now that we have,
Right.
robo calendars, it's easier.
Yeah.
Um, and that keeps the robots from scheduling meetings. And at every opportunity, when they say, well, let's have this committee meeting on Friday or whatever, I'd say, oh, sorry, that's my research day.
Yep.
And after a while, I was actually in a meeting when someone said, oh, we can't do it then. That's Beth's research time.
Oh, nice.
I,
Finally.
but you're
Yeah.
right. And I know, you have a job as well
Yep.
as trying to find time to write. It's a challenge. It is a challenge. And for me, I write best when I'm fully in the 1890s
Sure. Yeah.
rather than, okay, I got half an hour. What can I
Yeah,
do?
I've always been the proponent of if you can't write every day, don't like beat yourself up
What's up?
because then you're just going to feel bad about writing and that's
Mhm.
not what this is for. This is
Yeah.
supposed to be like what you need to do what you want to do, and if you can only write, like I can pretty much only write Friday mornings when I'm not working or Sundays at the coffee shop. Like I can't, like sitting here right now, I'm not going to be able to write today. There's basketball on, like whatever. And I just know that about myself. So every time I give a talk or advice to people, I'm like, don't. I know Stephen King writes 500 words a day or he gets up at whatever he does. I know people can block out, a lot of retired people can block out time. That's not feasible for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
don't beat yourself up. This is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to
Yeah.
like it.
I agree. I
Yeah.
think that's great advice. I think that's great advice. And honestly, for me, and I know this is not true for junior faculty,
Mm,
once I had tenure, then you're really
sure.
freed up, right?
You
There's
got
not
time.
that pressure of I have to finish this,
Right.
in order to get tenure. Um, that helped in terms of freeing it up.
Oh, I
So I
bet.
just, I I write when I can. I do spend Sunday mornings at coffee
I
shops
know,
too.
yeah, because I can't do it in my house. There's stuff on TV and the cats, and like, luckily I have no like, luckily I'm single, so like, there's nothing else to bother me. But yeah, like, there's cleaning to do. So no, if I can go somewhere else to do it, especially a local coffee shop, I just feel
Yep.
more productive. And then usually I buy myself a little treat, and I'm like, okay, if I write 500 words, I'm gonna eat that treat, which is probably why I'm fat now. But that's okay. It works. It's my process, and it works.
And whatever works for you is absolutely
Exactly.
fine.
That's exactly right. As long as you're doing it and it makes you happy and you want to keep doing it, just do it how it works for you and don't let anybody tell you differently.
Well,
Um,
and kind of a variation on a saying we had in grad school, a variation of that is, what do you call a person who takes 10 years to publish a book?
a writer.
Author.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Yeah.
when was your first book published? Like your
My
first official book?
uh my first official book would have been published 96, 2002, I
Okay.
think,
Yeah.
Shaping
And
the Faith.
it
Yeah.
took me until I was 35, so 2019, to publish a book. So like, we're not all
Yeah. I was in my 30s. I
yeah.
I did my doctorate late. Yeah.
Yeah. So like,
Later,
guys,
later, not late,
guys,
later.
you got time. Don't worry about it. My
Yeah.
third book will be coming out when I'm 43. So it's all dependent on like where you fall
Well,
in the process. Like,
yeah,
don't,
and I remember writing my dissertation and
yeah.
thinking, how am I ever going to find another topic? This is so, I'll never find anything. Now there's piles of
Yeah.
ideas, many of them written on Dairy Queen
Yeah.
napkins. I
Oh,
think
nice.
well in the car. It's like, ooh, Dairy Queen
Yeah.
napkins. So yeah, you
Which Dairy Queen, if you're listening, I would love to be sponsored by you because I do love a good blizzard. So
oh, Sanford, Maine.
there, see, I love what my newest is, Oreo blizzard, but with chocolate soft serve, and it's so good. But
Yes.
that's beside the point. Sorry, distract. It's like squirrel. I do want to touch on, so history is kind of your all encompassing, and then you're co-founder of the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. When did that come about, and how did that come about? And that fascinates me.
Oh, thank you. We are very proud that this is our 20th year
Wow,
as a
awesome.
program. So my colleague and I founded it 20 years ago, and the reason was actually the students,
Mm,
because my colleague is a literature professor, Dr. Jennifer Tuttle, and I'm a historian, and we shared so many students
right.
because she teaches often about women's literary
Mm,
production. And so we realized we shared these students, and it was students who came to us and said, wouldn't it be great if we had a women's studies program? And so the women's studies program started as a way to document on their transcripts exactly what students were doing. They
right.
were intentionally picking women-centered courses.
Wow.
And then, so we founded the program. It grew, and then um, the field expanded
Mhm.
to have a broader encompassment
Sure.
of individuals, we added women, gender, and sexualities
Yeah.
to the title. But we are
20 years.
exceedingly
That's
proud of the
awesome.
program. Our students go on to do amazing things in
Oh,
every field and endeavor in life. So it's one of the things I'm most proud of
I thought
in
that
my
when I
career.
saw that you were the co-founder, I was like, that's really cool to have like, and now to know it's been 20 years, like, oh my God, that's a legacy. So not only are
Thank you.
you a legacy as part of the university, your legacy of championing women's stories, I think. Look, I'm gonna cry. I don't even know you, and I'm gonna cry. I'm like, that's just, to me, that's so amazing. Again,
Thank
I
you.
just,
I'm very proud of it.
when women can do things, I'm like, yay. I mean, we can do anything, but like when they really put their money where their mouth is, so to speak,
Yeah.
and say, I want to teach. I want more people to know about these stories.
Yeah.
Love it. This is again a hard left. Your cat, Floyd. Why is
Floyd.
he named Floyd? Because I love that so much.
Floyd was a stray, maybe feral, showed up outside of my husband's antiquarian bookstore, which has it's a 19th century building, and then a barn, and then a shed, and under the shed is where, kind of
Oh,
lost cats appear. And so Floyd showed up, and when he looks at you, his face looks like he's smiling, so we started to call him Pretty Boy Floyd.
oh, I love that. I saw
And
the name and I was like, Oh, these are
He,
my people. Like I love human names on cats. I found a cat today on TikTok. What was the cat's name? Oh my God. It was so funny because it's a boy, it's a girl cat. Oh, a girl cat named Rick.
I
And so
like
it's
it.
like my cat Rick. And I have a girl cat named Captain. So like I know I like a good gender non-specific name.
Yeah.
But yeah, Floyd, I was like, can you imagine just walking through the house and be like, Floyd, where are you, Floyd? Uh,
And he's just a Floyd. He is so
my cat from Maine is Fern, and I feel like
uh,
that's another thing. Like when you're just yelling in the yard, people are like, "Is she yelling at an old person? Like what's going on with it?" So I feel like
exactly.
with Floyd, it's a similar situation where they're like, "No, there's not an elderly person I'm abusing. It's my cat, and I'm not abusing him. I'm just trying to find him." Um, and then I have a regular cat named Madeline. She's normal.
Yes, I saw that. We both have Madeleines in our
Yeah,
lives. So
exactly. And of course, I named the cat and then named the character in the book, so there's no relation. But I just love that name, so it was like, well, it's gonna stick around. So, and I'm not having kids, so like, there you go. Sorry,
there
mom.
you go. Yeah.
Those are the grandchildren. But we're coming up to the end. We have about 10 minutes left, and before we go, I want to make sure I get because you are probably the perfect person to ask book recommendations or things to read or other than your own books, what inspired you, what did you hate, stuff like that. I'll take anything. I'll take any recommendations.
Yeah. So one thing that this project prompted me to do was to dive a little bit into the world of fiction with female detectives.
Mm-hmm.
I did grow up on Nancy Drew.
Of course.
I remember the day that I read the last one that the Peacedale Public Library had. And on that day, the librarian said, well, I think you're ready for the second floor. And there
Ooh,
was a mezzanine, and that's where
the adult
the
fiction.
yeah, adult
It's
fiction
adultish.
and maybe, I mean, today what we might call young adult. So
Yeah.
that made me so proud. But it'd been many years since I'd read that. So one series, and you mentioned her already, Edith
Yeah.
Maxwell, Maddie Day. I really love her C.C. Barton
Okay.
series
Yep.
set out in California. She works at a winery, and so there's a lot of kind of food history in there. And
Mhm.
she, like Jane Tucker, is somewhat of an accidental detective.
Which is most cozy mysteries. We're all sort of
Yeah,
accidentally investigatory.
yeah, and I love that idea. And I
Mm.
hadn't been. I'm not I'm not a reader of
Sure.
kind of gruesome true crime.
Same.
Just not my thing. Gives me nightmares. But so when I was introduced to cozy mysteries,
Yeah.
was like, wow, this is fun.
This
I
is my
love it.
people.
So
Yeah.
so that's kind of my reader recommendation. If you haven't read Maddie Day's CC Barton series, and she has many, as you
I was
mentioned,
just
she
gonna
has
say she's got a whole lot of other series too.
yeah.
So
So
any
great.
anything you think you like, she's probably written about it.
She's probably written about it. And we'll just give her a shout out. She is a very generous author with her
A
time and
hundred
efforts.
percent. A
So
100%.
yay, Maddie. The other book I'd recommend. So here's the book if you're into historical fiction and as an author. Jodi Picoult's new book, By
Oh
Any
yeah.
Other Name.
I've heard it. I haven't read it yet, but
It
I hear it's
is
great.
fabulous. So for your listeners, it's a braided narrative of a woman living in Shakespeare's time who the author asserts may have been the person who was really writing Shakespeare's plays.
Yeah.
And that story is braided together with a contemporary woman. I think we meet her in grad school at first, and she is a playwright, but her plays, because of her gender,
Mm,
get dismissed.
mm.
And these two stories are interwoven through time, as authors, as readers, as yeah. This is, I mean, it's
She's
wonderful. I
and she's
couldn't.
another great person. So
Oh,
it's always nice when you can support an author that's a great person too. Like, okay,
absolutely,
cool, cool.
absolutely. And just like all of her books, they
Yeah.
they ring true. It's just it, and it's a book. Not so much. She's not trying to say, well, this is the answer to Dietrich.
Right. Well, it's
It,
fiction,
it's
but
about it's about what we've been talking about,
yeah,
memory,
yeah.
remembering women for not even for giant contributions, but
Hmm.
just for living your daily life
Yeah.
is part of history. So
Right.
those are my recommendations of recent books that I've read that I've absolutely loved.
Well, I'm going to throw out a recommendation for everybody to get your book on April 29th when it's released, or pick it up from your library, or make your library order it like I did. Because,
Yes.
like I said, I'll
Thank
probably
you.
finish it tonight. I'm like almost at the end, and I'm like, I need to know. I did wiki it to spoil it because I'm a spoiler for myself, but I want to see how it kind of how it culminates, and it's great. And I didn't know what to expect, so I think that's also really kind of cool. Is like I
Oh,
did
great.
again,
Yeah.
never knew about this case, never knew. I mean, and I like I said, I feel like I'm a feminist and I know what goes on in women's worlds, but to not know this case, I think is a big deal. Like, I think more women should know that there were people before us who stood up for, I mean, she gave up 9 years of her life for this man, and
Yeah.
she's
And
ruined,
yeah.
and he's still a congressperson. So like, it makes you mad, but it makes you laugh. And then there's also parts where you're like, this isn't real life. And then you're like, but it is real life. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very
which,
much.
and also because reading this book has made me want to go get the other books. So you might see a tick on your book sales because I might be buying more after today.
Thank you.
But where can people find you online in the area? You're in Maine. Let's
I'm
throw
in
that
Maine.
there. Yeah.
I do have a website, elizabethdewolfe.com. DeWolfe has an E on the end, so elizabethdewolfe.com. Um, you can also find me on Facebook,
Mhm.
and you can find me occasionally on Instagram. I'm trying. Lately on Facebook and Insta, I've been running little stories about the research as
Yeah.
we ramp up to the release of the book, which I know just the other day, I got an email from the press that the books are in the warehouse.
Oh,
And I know that some people who have pre-ordered have emailed me and said, my credit card just got charged for
oh my
your
God,
book.
that means it's like happening. It's like real life.
Yeah, it's really happening.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
And thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for joining me on this today. I'm glad we're like IRL friends now. Like now we know each other face to face.
Absolutely, absolutely. This was so much fun. This is a great conversation.
I want to drive to Maine just so I can take a class with Professor DeWolfe because I think she's so engaging. And like I said, the story is so amazing. And I feel like that's probably the energy she brings to her teaching. And it's just engaging. And so definitely check out her book when it comes out at the end of April or sooner because now they're in the warehouse. Or get your library to order it, like I got my library to order it. I thought I would do something a little different today, and I already did this once, but again, my computer decided to be a BITCH and it did not record it right. So I was going to show you what's on my Kindle. This is my little Kindle back. TikTok shop made me buy it. These little inserts for the cover. That's kind of what the screen looks like right now. All my notes from Agnes, Alias Agnes. One of the things I really got excited to talk about, and then it didn't record, was I'm reading a book called The Tomb of the Sun King, which is a Raiders of the Arcana book 2. And it is by Jacqueline Benson. If you're a fan of like The Mummy and Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, it's that, but in Victorian times. The first one is set in British Honduras at the time. There's a slow burn romance, but there's also lots of action and adventure. I love the series. I'm on the second one. It's so good. Highly recommend. Another one I'm reading, as I talked about in the podcast, a lot of Victorian mysteries where there's a strong woman and usually a Bow Street runner or a member of Scotland Yard. It's called the Mudlark Murders by Lana Williamson. Williams? Oh, I just looked at it. Look at me. I'm like halfway through all these books, so it's like really kind of fun. About this book, it is Lana Williams, The Mudlark Murders. It's the second in her series, so I love a good series, and I will always read a series. One from NetGalley that I'm reading is Strange New World by Vivian Shaw, which is a fantasy, heaven and hell, vampires, some werewolves. Greta Helsing is a doctor who treats supernatural beings. She's also married or together with a vampire. It's like the fifth book in the series. It's kind of just fun, and there's like moral stuff. And actually, I have a friend who just wrote a story about a coffee shop in hell, so I got to recommend it to him. That's a fun series. I'm also reading the next book in Hafiz's Faisal's Tempest of Tea book fantasy series. It's called A Steeping of Blood. That's also another, whatchamacallit, NetGalley. And then one that I found, and I don't know how I found this, but it goes back to, this is one of those Victorian seance, supernatural with a little history, with a little antique in it, and it's called Flower Dew, and the Secret Sarcophagus, which is the most recent one. It's the third in the series. Again, I've been blowing through them because I love the characters, so I'm going to keep reading them. I feel like there was a second one that I didn't read, but that's okay. I'll figure it out. So that's kind of what's on my Kindle, a little something different than what I usually do, where I show you the books. But if you have questions, as always, just reach out and I can give you any of those recommendations for real. Sports-wise, we talked a little bit about at the beginning. The Celtics are still really good. Still on track. They just sold to a billionaire in California, but he's a Celtics fan, so we'll see if that helps. The Bruins, not so good. Yeah, I don't even know if I can talk about them because they're just, they're there. So mainly it's basketball, baseball. Baseball is very much on the radar, and this week will be really fun because it's going to be kicking off for real. For me, for book events coming up, I've already forgotten, and I just said it all. November's the Crime Bake. So if you're interested in coming to a conference for writers and readers of crime fiction, come then. April 12th, I will be at the Weymouth Public Library for a local author book fair. So me and a couple other authors. So feel free to come to Tufts Library on Broad Street, even just to say hi. I don't have book 3 yet, so you can just come and chitty chat if you've already bought the first 2. And if you haven't bought the first 2, what are you waiting for? Come buy them from me, because I will reap the benefits, and you get a signed copy. And some swag, because who doesn't love swag? I love swag. May 16th, I forgot about this last week, but May 16th is the home opener for the Brockton Rocks, which is now it used to be the Collegiate League. They got a New England Knockouts team, which was a Frontier League, but now they've combined and it's just one. It's the Frontier League and it's the Brockton Rocks, and co-owned by Jim Rice, for those that know. And they're having a home opener block party from 5 to 7 before the game, and me and friend Rosie Pease, friend of the show, who writes baseball romances, will have a table, and you can come by my mysteries and her romance, and then go watch a little baseball game for an affordable price. And they just partnered with Charlie's Cheesesteak, so you can get good sandwiches. I am partial to a ballpark hot dog, and I cannot wait, and a giant Diet Coke. So that's Friday, May 16th, and then I think there's fireworks afterwards. So if you stay long enough, I never do, but maybe I will. Who knows? I might sell so many books that I'll want to party. So that's going to be really exciting. At the end of April, I'll be in D.C., Bethesda, for the Malice Domestic. I did not get picked for a panel, but I will be wandering the halls, and I think probably that Saturday my dad will be there to hang out with me and all my writer friends. So come, make sure you say hi to us. We'll be walking around, and I'll be there Thursday through Sunday, so you can come find me at any time. And maybe I'll get some more writing on book 4 done, because I'm about 7,000 words in. We're getting there. But for those that are waiting for book 3, since I had to switch publishers, the timeline now extends out a little bit. So we think it's 2026. But the good thing is it's almost April. So 2026 is just around the corner. And if you want any sort of hints about it, just follow my socials, and I'll put some hints for book 3, little snippets and whatnot, so you can get excited about that. I thought this was a handkerchief, but it's just my gloves. Okay, sorry guys. So that's it. I highly recommend you pick up Elizabeth's book, and I also can't wait to check out her other ones, because again, giving a voice to the voiceless is so important, especially in this climate, that it's something that needs to be brought to light. And this story, Alias Agnes, really brought that to the front. And I think more people should be finding out about these things. So, as always, go Red Sox.